Let the record reflect. Case file 7 exposed the maneuver. Case file 8 rejected the negotiation. Case file 9 secured the record. The exhibits are entered. The sequence is locked. The architecture holds. The VAPID protocol is active. And that means something precise has happened, whether the opposition wants to admit it or not. The room they relied on is gone. Manipulation does not operate well in a structured environment. It requires gaps. It requires unstable sequence. It requires breathable confusion. It requires enough atmosphere in the room for intrusion to pass as concern, for pressure to pass as personality, for rerouted contact to pass as coincidence, for deniable behavior to keep dissolving before it can become pattern. That room has been decommissioned. Case file 9 closed those lanes. It made movement traceable. It made contradiction discoverable. It made the small things hold still long enough to become evidence. It made the old methods expensive to run. So now the system goes quiet. Not because it found a conscience, because it finally understands your humanity, because it has entered a new condition, pressure. Because for the first time, movement no longer disappears into atmosphere. For the first time, access leaves residue. For the first time, sequence survives the performance. The same old tactics are not landing in confusion. They are landing against posture, record, and cost. Opening case file 10, the pressure chamber. Do not mistake this quiet for peace. Peace is clean. This is compress. This is the sound a manipulative system makes when the lies do not glide the way they used to. This is the sound of access becoming awkward. This is the sound of intrusion losing rhythm under better lighting. This is the sound of a predatory pattern discovering that the room no longer holds its breath, and that matters. Because the listener has spent so long being told that when nothing happens, nothing changed. But in this file, quiet means something very specific. It means the old methods stop paying off. It means the old lanes are no longer frictionless. The room has begun answering to a different authority. Not charisma, not pleading, not fear, structure. And once structure starts deciding what survives, silence stops sounding empty and starts sounding expensive.
The cost of contact.
Silence is usually misread as conscience. People want to believe the quiet means growth, reflection, a lesson finally landing. Some private moral breakthrough the aggressor never had while the damage was still profitable. No, this is not conscious. This is economics. Before the record, the system operated inside a zero-cost model. It could escalate, deny, reroute, and retreat for free. It could move quickly, contradict itself, flood the room with urgency, apply pressure in one lane while performing innocence in another. And because sequence was unstable, it could always argue interpretation, always revise the event, always reposition itself faster than the target could stabilize reality. That economy is over. Now, every move costs, not emotionally, structurally. A message becomes an entry. A reroute becomes a lane attempt. A contradiction becomes an anchor. A small move becomes measurable once it lands inside a coherent pattern. That changes everything because manipulation depends on a cheap motion, cheap access, cheap pressure, cheap revision. The moment those things stop being cheap, the system has to go quiet long enough to reprice the risk. That is what you are hearing. Not remorse, not enlightenment, a lost model. The system has gone quiet because it is pricing the risk. Every move now feeds the file. Every probe now has administrative consequence. Every contradiction now strengthens the architecture that restricts it. You did not make them kinder. You made them measurable. You made their behavior expensive. You changed the math. And for a manipulative system, measurability is operational collapse. That is one of the deepest forms of power there is. Not begging a system to respect you, creating conditions under which disrespect becomes costly to the one attempting it. That is not small. That is strategic adulthood.
The fall of improvisation.
Manipulation has always depended on speed. Not just physical speed, psychological speed. The speed of the pivot, the speed of the rewrite, the speed of the tearful reversal, the speed of accusations landing before the target has fully processed the original offense. That speed is not random. It is tactical. If they move fast enough, they can force you into explanation before you have sequence. And once you start explaining from inside confusion, they regain altitude. That was the advantage. No stable record, no durable order, no architecture strong enough to hold the truth still while the performance tried to run around it. Case 09 canceled that advantage. The master log removed improvisational altitude. They can no longer freestyle a new version of yesterday because the timestamp is already in archive. They can no longer perform innocence detached from context because the lead-up map survives the scene. They can no longer convert contradiction into ambiguity because the contradictions now sit side by side. Now the very thing that once made them effective starts betraying them. Speed becomes dangerous. Improvisation becomes self-exposure. The emotional pivot becomes discoverable pattern. That is the fall of improvisation, and it is more triumphant than most people realize. Many survivors think power means feeling strong in the moment. Sometimes it does, but sometimes power is colder than that. Sometimes power is realizing that the room no longer has to believe you immediately for you to still win structurally. Sometimes power is no longer needing to outrun the lie in real time because the lie is now trapped inside sequence. That is power, not louder speech, not better pleading, better terrain. And the terrain has changed.
The probe, what a constrained system does next.
Do not confuse silence with surrender. Do not assume the silence is permanent. A constrained system will eventually test the perimeter, not to reconcile, to measure, to determine whether the record has softened back into narrative. At first, silence behaves like reconnaissance. The system studies. It taps the glass. It tests the seams, not because it wants a full return, because it wants information. The passive probe, a view, a profile visit, a subtle trace, a low visibility signal designed to trigger awareness without triggering formal accusation. This is surveillance in low light. A way to ask, does your nervous system still move for me? Because if you visibly startle, they learn something. If you scramble your settings, they learn something. If you mirror the contact, they learn something. The content of the probe matters less than the response it extracts. The ambiguous probe. I saw this and thought of you. Oops, wrong person. A soft line designed to look harmless, to refuse, and too personal to ignore. This is engineered ambiguity. If you ignore it, they hope you feel cruel. If you answer it, they get confirmation that the perimeter still leaks under social pressure. The proxy probe, a third party, a mutual, a family voice, a spiritual courier, a concerned outsider carrying softness on behalf of a closed source. This is where the system tests whether direct access can be replaced with emotional rerouting, whether empathy can still be used as a key. These are not olive branches. They are reconsonance. And here is a triumph built into this stage. These probes are not proof that they still have power. They are proof that they lost their previous access model. That is why the probes are smaller. That is why they are softer. That is why they are deniable. A system that was fully in control would not need reconnaissance. It would simply move. The probe is evidence of uncertainty, evidence of reduced confidence, evidence that the structure is forcing them to test before they touch. That is not defeat for you. That is the scoreboard. Protocol, passive absorption. No dramatic block, no sermon, no emotional return signal, no performance of being above it. The probe enters the environment. The probe finds no climate, no signal, no traction, no theater, no responsive surface. It is logged as a data point in archive. It dies there. That is not passive. That is advanced perimeter discipline. And it is devastating to a manipulative system because it confronts them with the one thing they are least equipped to metabolize: irrelevance.
The internal counterfeit.
The silence outside is one thing. The silence inside the body is another. Once the noise stops, the nervous system does not automatically become wise. It becomes vulnerable to revision pressure. Absence invites counterfeit interpretation. When intensity has been used to simulate relevance, the sudden lack of motion can be misread as new evidence. The system has not improved. The stimulus field has dropped. That distinction is critical. This is where many people get seduced backwards, not through direct contact, through unauthorized edits. Maybe it was not that bad. Maybe the quiet means understanding. Maybe restriction indicates change. Maybe the old chaos only felt unbearable because it was constant. Negative. That is not updated evidence. That is pattern withdrawal attempting narrative revision. That is aftershock trying to rewrite chain of custody. Do not let nostalgia submit a counterfeit character reference for a system that is only quiet because it is constrained by data. Do not let lowered activity impersonate transformation. Do not let relief corrupt the master log. The quiet is not moral repair. The quiet is restricted maneuverability. The system did not go silent because it became safe. It went silent because the former delivery method stopped paying. That is the truth. And the truth has to outrank withdrawal symptoms. The foul outranks the craving for atmosphere.
The return of command.
Silence does not merely remove pressure. It returns faculties. It returns command functions. Under active pressure, perception is consumed by intake. Respond, clarify, defend, stabilize, repeat. That tempo prevents analysis. It keeps the target too occupied by impact to diagram the system. In chaos, you react too fast to perceive architecture. You survive event to event, impact to impact, message to message. And in that state, the system looks bigger than it is because you are always inside its weather. Silence changes the weather. Now, faculties come back online. Comparison, pattern retention, timing recognition, sequence mapping, mechanic identification, observation, discernment, temporal distance. Now, the loops emerge. The crises stop looking random. The misunderstandings reveal themselves as repeatable mechanics. The triangulations reveal timing. The rehearsed innocence becomes visual maneuver. The perfectly timed emergency stop looking like fate and start reading like design. The pressure no longer looks atmospheric. It looks engineered. That is the return of command. Not a sentimental victory, a operational one. You are no longer standing inside the machine asking why it hurts. You are outside it identifying structure, access points, and fuel lines. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? You start asking, what structure was the system running? And how do I make sure it never lives here again? That is not victim consciousness. That is forensic authority. You are no longer just the target. You are no longer just the witness. You are the analyst, the architect of the counter environment. That is the shift from immersion to vantage, from reaction to architecture.
The humiliation of the limit.
There is no dignity in a contained system. A manipulative operator wants frictionless access, immediate reach, immediate effect, the ability to enter, disturb, and revise without meeting retained sequence. It wants confusion subsidized by the room. It wants free movement without residue. Containment insults that entitlement. The silence is where the system is forced to sit with reduced range, forced to calculate before touching, forced to test before moving, forced to face a room that no longer absorbs confusion for free. That reduction matters. Do not romanticize it. Do not soften it into growth. Before, it moved and you absorbed the cost. Now it hesitates because the room has stopped subsidizing confusion. It has been reduced from atmosphere to attempt. Reduced from narrative owner to perimeter tester. Reduced from assumed access to conditional reach. Reduced from immediate pressure to delayed calculation. This is not evidence that they become better people. It is evidence that they become inefficient operators. That is a structural triumph. Not because the aggressor disappeared, because the aggressor has been reduced, because the old mechanics are failing under conditions they did not choose. That is not neutral. That is dominance by environment.
The new standard.
No, this is not an intermission. It is construction. It is enforcement. It is an environmental standard. Every day the log is maintained. Every bait declined. Every probe absorbed without theater. The environment becomes less compatible with the old pattern. You are not waiting for them to improve. You are becoming structurally incompatible with their former access to you. This is a completely different posture. The question is, no longer will they behave. The question is, does the environment permit anything other than accountable contact? If the answer is no, the containment holds. Authority at this stage is not emotional hardness. It is exactness. Exactness about sequence. Exactness about cost. Exactness about what conditions must be degraded for the old access model to resume. If the environment must be weakened for access to work, then access is a security risk. That is the standard. No debate, no sentimental override, no exception process for reduced motion. Once the body learns that the old pattern no longer runs the room, something begins reorganizing beneath language. Thresholds change, reactions change, appetite for confusion collapses. The need to explain yourself in real time starts dying off. That is not just healing, that is regime change. The file remains in force.
The pressure chamber.
While you're holding the line, holding the sequence, holding the structure, holding the perimeter without volunteering fresh access just because the room got quieter, do not assume the quiet has produced peace on the other side. It has not. Containment does not create peace inside a manipulative system. It creates pressure, because the file was never about vague discomfort. It was never about a little tension. It was about intrusion, boundary breaches, unwanted contact, rerouted contact, proxy movement, flying monkeys, soft invasions dressed up as concern, deniable behavior designed to agitate the perimeter and then hide inside ambiguity. That is what the master law was built to hold. Not guesses, not moods, entries, dates, patterns, channels, timing, lane attempts. The small things that were supposed to be dismissed until they stopped being small in sequence. And once all of that is retained, once all of that is no longer floating around as disconnected irritation, but sitting inside an actual record, something starts happening on the other side of the wall. The old confidence breaks rhythm, because lies sound different once truth stops chasing them and starts outlasting them. Distortion moves differently once the target is no longer standing in the middle of the room trying to explain the smoke. And access games get awkward once the perimeter is no longer emotional, but structural. That awkwardness matters. That friction matters, because for the first time, their old movements are not landing inside confusion the way they used to. They are landing against posture, against sequence, against a record, against someone who may not be making a parade out of the win, but is still winning structurally. That is the pressure chamber. Before they could move and let atmosphere do the rest, a call here, a reroute there, a third party, a coincidence too perfectly timed, a harmless looking pass at the perimeter, a nervous system disruption, a little deniable pressure, a little confusion dropped into the room and then abandoned there for you to carry. But once the room changes, once the record hardens, once direct access is cut off or restricted to certain lanes, once people have to go through channels they did not choose, once some doors are closed and other doors are being watched, the old ease disappears. Now they have to think about which routes still exist, which routes are closed, which routes leave too much residue, which proxies are too obvious, which lane attempts strengthen the file instead of weakening it, which version of the story can still survive contact with the record. That is where the scramble starts. It's not always loud, not always visible, not always in a way that gives you the satisfaction of watching it unfold in real time, but scramble all the same, because now they are sitting with a problem they were never built for. Your truth is no longer trying to outrun their lie. Your truth is standing still. And that is harder for a false narrative to survive. So yes, the room is quiet, but on their side of the wall, the quiet is crowded. Crowded with recalculation, crowded with suppressed motion, crowded with routes being considered and discarded, crowded with attempts to figure out whether the old tricks can still be made to look accidental, crowded with growing realization that What used to feel smooth now feels obvious. What used to feel deniable now feels traceable. What used to feel clever now feels risky. That is a part of humiliation. Not just the access is restricted. The old methods are starting to look cheap under better lighting. That is where they review exposure. What you know, what you kept, what can be cross-checked now, what incidents look isolated in a moment but incriminating in sequence, which people were used, which channels were used, which lies cannot breathe the same way once the atmosphere has changed. This is where they try to salvage the narrative, not truth, narrative. Can this still be called confusion? Can this still be called concern? Can this still be called misunderstanding? Can this still be softened into spirituality, stress, human nature, human error, grief, care, just checking, or coincidence? Can this still find a softer costume to wear back into a room that is no longer rewarding performance the way it used to? And if direct movement is too expensive, this is where the search for side doors begins. A mutual, a family friend, a spiritual middleman, a social trace, a little signal, a small enough move to excuse later, a personal enough move to test whether the perimeter still flinches. Because once the main door is no longer easy to use, systems like this do not stop wanting entry. They start studying alternate routes. And under all of that is the real question they are trying to answer. Not whether you are still hurt, not whether can they still get a reaction on a bad day, whether their structure is real, whether the excommunication is real, whether the closed door is real, whether the filtered lane is real, whether the new posture is real, whether the room truly changed ownership or time, guilt, nostalgia, loneliness, confusion, or fatigue. Can it still soften the walls enough to let them back into a version of old access? That is what containment forces them to face. Not just distance, reduction. Reduction in freedom, reduction in confidence, reduction in improvisational range, reduction in the fantasy that they can still move however they want and leave nothing behind. That is why the silence matters, because on their side, it is not serenity. It is pressure. It is awkwardness. It is suppressed panic trying to keep a straight face. It is entitlement meeting friction. It is distortion losing rhythm under the weight of retrained truth. And that matters because if you do not understand what the silence is doing over there, you may start romanticizing it. You may start assuming that quiet means growth, reflection, softness, change. No. Often it means the old machine is no longer easy to run. Often it means the cost of movement has gone up. Often it means the lies are not gliding the way they used to because the room is no longer helping them. Often it means they are still interested in access, but no longer confident in what reaching for will expose. So let the pressure chamber do its work. Let them sit with the new math. Let them feel the drag of consequence. Let them feel how strange it is when the same old maneuvers no longer produce the same old outcomes. Let them study walls they did not build and cannot easily move. You do not help a contained system recalculate its access to you. You hold the line, you keep the record, and you let the awkwardness of all of their failed mechanics keep opening their lives wider on the other side of the wall.
The verdict is in.
The verdict.
They are integrated.
Let the record reflect. The opposition relied on open lanes. The system relied on cheap access. The maneuver relied on breathable confusion. That environment has been decommissioned. By maintaining sequence, closing lanes, and denying fresh atmosphere to old tactics, you have converted exposure and to cost. The silence is not peace, it is cost. The silence is not innocence, it is restricted movement. The silence is not change, it is failed efficiency under pressure. The same probes now register as documented attempts. The same reroutes now register as violations. The same lies now drag residue. The same system that once operated for free must now calculate the mounting expense of every move. That is not reconciliation. That is not mutual understanding. That is not closure by conversation. That is intrusion meeting structure. That is manipulation meeting retained sequence. This is a predatory system losing oxygen inside a room that no longer helps it breathe. Case file 10. The pressure chamber, status, pressurized, status, holding, directive, maintain the line, update the record. Let the silence keep exposing the mechanics. I am Woofy. Welcome to the resistance.